It is a beautiful night, very windy and cold where I live, actually. We had pretty severe winds today and a whole lot of snow. I probably have to do like 10 or 15 minutes of shoveling after this show. Um, but here we are, you know, welcome. I appreciate you guys being here. My apologies for being very late today. I think my sleep patterns caught up to me, and that's good because I'd rather, be forced to delay some things and get good sleep instead of continue to mess up my sleep schedule. But welcome in. Had a good show yesterday. We have, I want to celebrate this on this channel. We have had 3 days, and I think today will be the fourth day, where we pass 50,000 views in a day. Introducing YouTube Shorts has been one of the best decisions of my life. Our subscribers have increased, our views have increased, our earnings have increased, our reach has increased, in part due to the fact that I love to use Twitter. We've been using TikTok. We've even started Instagram. I believe, let me just like quickly check the description. I believe a lot of that stuff, Twitter is linked there. Unfortunately, other sites are not. But I want to update my live show. I will actually do all of this. I'll do some of this week. Uh, Instagram, TikTok, it's just college football with Sam. It's just that, literally. Branding, same thing. We upload pretty much all of our shorts on those sites when we upload them on YouTube. It's been an awesome ride, and only like 3 days ago, or four maybe, or five, we hit 30,000 subs, and we're already a third of the way to 31,000. Hoping and praying for a year for 2026 where we just blow out our competition. And I think that's possible with certain things in mind. So, with all that being said, that is not why we're live. Not to talk about my channel or what I want it to be. We are live to discuss bold predictions for the college football playoff quarterfinals. I want to do more topics, but today has been a slow day, and I think this is really the meat of what I want to talk about. A lot of other things I plan on talking about this week. Some stuff tomorrow will be relating to the playoffs. And yes, I do want to go live tomorrow. But a lot of stuff on these shows for the rest of the week will actually start to focus on 2026. That's the time of the year we're in, where we're transitioning. So, I want to discuss, Sugar Bowl, Orange Bowl, Rose Bowl, Cotton Bowl, and some very bold predictions I have for all of those games. I want to thank Hoosier Viking for becoming a member of our YouTube channel. I appreciate you a lot. You've been, very thoughtful in the comment section, and you've engaged with plenty of my videos. It's been a wild ride, seeing Indiana videos get more views than some of my Ohio State and Michigan and Nebraska videos. Like, that's wild. But it's also very incredible to see the rise of Indiana football right before my very eyes. So let's just get into it. And also thank you to Moody Meatball for being a moderator, Armand Hammer for being a moderator. Thank you for all of those things. But let's get to this, because I do have some other things to do, and I don't want to keep you guys too long for just 4 topics. But these are special topics because, again, they're bold predictions, and there are also videos where I'm making some changes to my my predictions from earlier, like this one in the Cotton Bowl, where I got to be honest, in looking at metrics a little more, and talking to some people I trust and watching more content, I I kind of am thinking here that Ohio State's going to win in a pretty big way. And it's not because Miami is this soft team or they're not physical. It's just because Ohio State's better. They are. They are. I mean, there is a reason Ohio State is favored by 9.5 here. There is. Originally, I questioned it, but the more I looked into it, and the more I stared at it, and then the more I peered through the metrics, I thought to myself, wait, hold on. Okay, yeah, I I can see why this line's at 9.5. Like it makes sense. Originally I thought maybe it was too high. I thought it was accurately priced initially. Now I think that not only is it accurately priced, but it might be like a discounted line for Ohio State. It might be. Just because of the styles, where a lot of people will be bothered by this. Like some Ohio State fans that may even watch might be bothered by this because I'm basically going to call them a variant of Miami. But Ohio State is a variant of this Miami team. They belong to the same style of play. They love to be super slow. They have some foundational issues on offense that probably can't be fixed. Doesn't mean they can't be great there, but they they probably can't be the best offense just because of some of the foundational cracks they have in those units, especially with Miami, but I think it extends to Ohio State too. Defensively, there aren't very many, if any, limits to these defenses. More so for Ohio State on that side. Ohio State is a better version of Miami at everything except for defensive line's probably a push, and offensive line's Miami. Ohio State otherwise is better in every other way, and stylistically with how they like to drain clock and out physical you, it's similar. So it basically what I'm trying to say is it's bordering on something I think that Baldfather Betts, a friend of the channel, has called 2021 Michigan versus Georgia theory, where Team A and Team B are nearly identical in how they want to play the game. Team A is way better than Team B at everything or almost everything. Team A will always beat Team B, with rare exception. Rare exception. It doesn't fit that analogy like a glove because of the line of scrimmage stuff we talked about, but I think there are comparisons there. Um and that's really my segue into these bold predictions here and what they'll be based on, what they'll be based on. The longer, the more I've thought about the Cotton Bowl, the more that I'm convinced Ohio State is going to not only win, but cover. So I want to make that official. I'm flipping my prediction from Ohio State winning, but Miami covering, to Ohio State winning and covering that 9.5. Done. That box is checked. I now want to discuss bold predictions for this game. And the first one that I will give that isn't even a part of my list is that this game on film won't be close. It won't be a blowout, but I think you will see very early on that Ohio State is better. And they are clearly better. Not at every position, not at every position group. But what I keep seeing on the internet that really bugs me, I am a line of scrimmage guy. I love talking about lines of scrimmage. I love teams that are good, great there. I love ball control football. And that is something that I have been kind of adamant about this year and last year, that Ohio State's strength is offensively not ball control football. Defensively, it is. Defensively, they've been perfect on the line of scrimmage for 2 years in a row. Offensively, no. But people are making too much out of that. They are. Number one, Ohio State's offensive line is a good unit. It's not Joe Moore Award caliber. It's not great. I wouldn't even say it's good at run blocking, but it's average there. It's great at pass blocking. It averages out to a good unit collegiately with opportunity to grow, and I expect them to be much better next year when the entire unit comes back and Bowen is in his second year. I think that makes logical sense. Miami's defensive line is incredible, has a matchup advantage there. But Ohio State is better in probably every other matchup outside of Ohio State's O-line versus Miami's defensive line, and maybe Ohio State's defensive line against Miami's offensive line. And even then, I think that Ohio State will fare better in trench play than some of these talking heads in the internet may think. I do believe, this is bold prediction number one, that Miami will earn at least 4 sacks. I think that they will get to Sayin. I think that they will overpower many of these, Ohio State, whether it's, they add a tight end to block or it's just the 5 offensive linemen blocking, no matter who's starting, no matter what it is. I think Miami has a pretty big edge with their D-line against Ohio State's offensive line. Against Indiana, I'm not really going to use the Texas game because that was week 1, and while I think the offensive line is almost concerningly similar to where it was in that game in a lot of aspects, you'd have hoped for more improvement throughout the year, but I don't think there really was that much. The offense is different because Day trusts Sayin now, and Sayin is a master at quarterback. In that Indiana game, Indiana threw different looks at Ohio State. They were able to get to the quarterback because of that. They were able to confuse Sayin in coverage. There were also moments in that game where, and this was especially the case in run offense versus run defense, where Indiana's front just straight up got behind Ohio State's offensive line very quickly. And there were moments where the left side of the Ohio State offensive line did well. There were also moments where they didn't do so well and either held or got pushed a little bit. And the right side of Ohio State's offensive line was pretty much abused for that entire game. Gabe Van Sickle came in, yes, in place of Shabola, and yes, they improved. They still couldn't run the ball with him in. And in terms of pass rush, I think that was neutered a bit by the fact that Ohio State decided to go with the quick game. They had that trick play. They were passing to their tight ends into the backfield more. They involved their tight ends more in those drives in the same way that ended up killing Ohio State using tight ends more. I also think using tight ends more actually helped them get some sustainable drives because they got the ball out quickly, and Indiana's pressure and messing with Ohio State in part was predicated on Ohio State early trying to go deep as they did against Michigan, maybe forcing it a bit, and that gave time for Indiana to pretty much always get home within 3 to 4 seconds. Miami here, while I do not believe they are as sophisticated on defense as Indiana, and I don't think they're as good there, I believe that their pass rush from their front 4, because of their superior athleticism, can be at least just as vicious. And in some cases, it might have even a easier time getting to Julian Sayin. And I think that matters. And as good as Ohio State's been in pass blocking, they shut down Michigan. They did shut down Texas, too. Let's not forget that. We've seen against Wisconsin. We've seen against Penn State. We saw against Indiana. Against great defensive fronts, and I don't even know if Michigan's one of them after that Ohio State game and then what followed against Indiana and what led up to Michigan in the prior weeks. I do think Miami will get some pressure here, for sure. But bold prediction number 2, I think will shock some of you about what I think about the other side of the line of scrimmage. Just to showcase some analytics here for what I'm talking about with pass rush, Miami's defense, as you see on that spider chart, is better at generating havoc plays than Ohio State's offense is at preventing them. And a big part of the reason why Miami is top 20 in EPA per pass allowed on defense, and a big part of the reason why their third and fourth down success is top 10 and their average third down distance is 5th in America, is because of that defensive line. I mean, believe me, their secondary is good. It's much better than it was last year. It is a secondary where if Sayin has time to throw, it will be plastered against these Ohio State receivers, especially Tate and especially Smith. It's not as good as Indiana's. It is not. Indiana is the best secondary that Ohio State's played all year, and it will be the best secondary Ohio State plays all year unless somehow Alabama wins out and faces them in the national title game. Like that was their worst matchup defensively. They match up better with Miami's defense than they did against Indiana's defense, and actually by quite a bit. So it's very important, if Miami even has a shot at winning, that they get to Julian Sayin. I think at least they fulfill that part. But Miami also has to run the ball, and they have to get offense. And that's where my second bold prediction comes in. I think Ohio State only allows 3 to 3.5 yards per carry. And that is factoring in sacks, kind of, because statistically in college, sacks are counted against rushing yards, which I think is stupid. But I also don't think that Ohio State will get a zillion pressures here, because Carson Beck likes to get the football out quickly, and because I think that Miami will want to run the ball more after what they saw against A&M, where I think they tried to pass the football a bit too much. So really, to allow only 3 to 3.5 yards per carry when factoring out sacks, that's elite run defense. And that's what Ohio State has. The dirty secret about Ohio State's defense, even though if you really were to obsess about metrics, you would think their pass defense is better than their run defense, it's not. And the Indiana game showed that. Indiana has one of the best rushing offenses on the planet this year. They can run power, they can run stretch, they can run counter, they can run inside, they can run outside. They can do anything in running the ball. They, in a sense, actually have a rushing offense that is as good as their passing offense, and sometimes even better. I would liken it to, it doesn't have the ceiling of their passing attack, but it may have a higher floor because they don't fumble either. Again, Indiana's the most fundamentally sound, well-coached team on the planet. And Ohio State, outside of a few runs here and there, was able to, not get a ton of TFLs. IU held up very well in the line of scrimmage. And Indiana was able to run the football enough to win and create some drives. But that's Indiana. You're not going to hold Indiana to, under 100 yards rushing, with rare exception. Ohio State did as good of a job as anyone in America could against that Indiana rushing offense, which is miles better than what Miami has out there. Miami's trenches are bigger than Indiana's, but are they as fundamentally sound? Is their scheme as good? Does their quarterback open up as many opportunities for the ground as Mendoza does? I don't think so. And I think that consequentially Miami's defense is easier to attack. But I was talking about the offense there. Miami's offense will be easier to defend for Ohio State than Indiana's was. I don't see a world where Patricia doesn't stack the box here. And I think he will stack the box often. He did against Indiana. It's part of the reason why they had success, and that opened up some opportunities for Indiana deep. I don't think there will be as many opportunities. Indiana actually didn't play a perfect game. There were more deep opportunities that they missed on. I just don't even expect those opportunities to really exist unless maybe Malachi Toney is matched up against Jermaine Matthews or Lorenzo Styles. I don't really think that they'll exist here, and Miami will want to run the ball, and they'll run into a wall that I don't think they will be able to move all that much. Miami can win this game with 3 to 3.5 yards per carry, by the way, but that narrows the amount of outcomes in which a win for Miami is possible. And where you see what I'm talking about here is that just look at the rush EPA per play on the spider chart. Miami is one of the worst EPA per rush attempts in all of football because there are very few, if any, explosive runs, and they're very power based, and then they have a lot of third down passing situations. Ohio State is one of the best defenses, third best in EPA per rush allowed, because they, especially on defense, bow up and run defense in the red zone, especially there. So I do not think Miami is going to have an easy time running the football here. Bold prediction number 3 is both quarterbacks give up 2 turnovers. So whether that's picks, whether that's a fumble, I think Sayan and Beck will at least have two giveaways to the other defense. This will be a game that features a lot of turnovers, and I think both of these quarterbacks will be in hell. Sayan under duress has been good in some games, but those games were against Wisconsin and Penn State, who do not have secondaries and do not have offenses. So while he's under pressure in a sense, he's also not, because his team isn't trailing. The game isn't in doubt. Pass rushers might be bearing down on him, but there's no worry. The defense can bail him out. With some of those defenses, because how one-dimensional they are, if he does have some success passing the ball, even the run defense late can bail him out. Against Indiana, we saw where it was actually a game and where they had a really good secondary. He got confused, he started pressing it, and he made some mistakes there. Wasn't terrible in that game, was far from it. I actually think he was good. But was he as elite as he is statistically, or as elite as he's looked in other games? No. I think Miami will be able to put him in hell here. But I also believe that Matt Patricia is going to put Carson Beck in hell too. I don't think either of these QBs will play at an elite level. And when you look at both of these defenses, they are better than both offenses, I believe. When you look at ESPN's FPI efficiency, Ohio State and Miami both have defenses that are actually significantly better in efficiency than both offenses. Ohio State has the most successful passing attack per success rate. They're only 60th there in running the football, though. In terms of run defense, both of these teams should do well, especially Ohio State, I would think. But also that comes down to style. Ohio State does break off a lot of explosive runs, and then they give up several runs that result in TFLs or minimal gain. So it's more boom or bust. Miami's is a bit more consistent. I don't think they allow as many negative plays, but they also rarely rip off those explosives. That's where the Texas A&M game was kind of rare and exposed A&M a little bit, where A&M's defense has kind of been a paper tiger all season long. It's why Miami could run on them. And that will put pressure on both of these quarterbacks, not just literally in the sense that these defensive linemen can tee off in a lot of situations, and they should have some matchup edges against these O-lines, especially Miami's D-line. But they'll also be under pressure in the sense that I think early it will be a close game. This is a playoff game, and they will have to do a lot of work to put their team in a position to win. Bold prediction number 4 is that Ohio State scores 20. I don't actually think this is extremely bold, but a lot of people are acting like Ohio State is going to have a hard time getting to 20. And initially, I thought they would, and I do think they'll have a hard time getting past 20. But hitting 20, all that takes is 2 touchdowns and 2 field goals. Fielding has not been amazing, but I also don't think Ohio State will be under the same pressure they were against IU, where the entire universe picked Ohio State to win that game, and more people picked Ohio State to dominate than win. It was the first Big Ten title game. This is a Cotton Bowl game where Ohio State is clearly the better team here. They've had more time to prepare in this game than they did for Indiana. They've probably learned some lessons. And even more importantly than that, let's say the pressure on Ohio State mentally is even greater. Well, Indiana is better than Miami by probably 10 points as well, same as Ohio State is. So they will have an easier time against this team than they did against IU, not just against Miami's offense, which is far worse than Indiana's, but Indiana's defense is also much better than Miami's. So the Ohio State players will have a lighter load to deal with here. It's not a light load, but Indiana's load is that heavy. It is a cross to carry Indiana on your back and to deal with them for 60 minutes. That is a tough task and one of the toughest tasks in college football. Miami is tough, but are they that tough? I don't know. I think that Miami's secondary is vulnerable here. I do not believe that they are, I don't think they're invincible. I don't think they're close to invincible. When you look at defensive numbers for Miami here on paper, they're very good in the secondary. But we saw Louisville and SMU get them, and they've played a schedule that is very, very conducive to putting up those type of numbers. You know, they've played Syracuse, they've played Stanford, they've played Pitt, they've played Florida with this year's awful DJ Lagway, Bethune-Cookman, USF. This is one of the easier strength of schedules left in the college football playoff. It's not as real of a pass defense as what Ohio State offers, for example, and it's not like they have faced the most elite cast of quarterbacks and receivers either. They've at least played Indiana, at least, which is a better passing offense than anything Miami has showcased. And when you study numbers and look at metrics, yet again, I just keep going back to when looking at Ohio State, they can get to 20, I think, in large part because Beck has thrown 10 interceptions this year. He had some throws against A&M that could have been gotten. I think Ohio State's defense is much better. And look, that's how I think Ohio State gets to 20 here. You know, I said both quarterbacks will give the football away 2 times. Who's better equipped to capitalize off those turnovers and extra positions? It's the team with the better offense, that being Ohio State. And speaking of Ohio State and how they'll do defensively against Miami, I think Miami scores 10 at most. And they could walk away being shut out or only scoring 3. Unless they have a turnover margin of 2 or more, I do not think they will win. If they win the turnover margin by 1, Ohio State still wins. They're a full 2 scores or lower end of 2 scores, which would be 9 or 10 points at least, better than the Hurricanes, especially when you think about the matchup, where these teams both want to go slow, they both want to engage in a rock fight. Maybe we'll see Ohio State tempo here. Maybe. But I also don't think this team will be as successful with tempo as last year's team was. Last year's team could use tempo because they had like 6 aliens on offense. Donovan Jackson, the 2 running backs, and then Carnell Tate-Smith plus Ibuka. And Howard was more of a run threat and a power run threat than Sayin. He was more experienced. And playoff Will Howard, I still think, is better than what we've seen out of Sayin so far. If you run tempo against this pass rush, you could neutralize it. You could also give a take. You could also give over, you could give a turnover up, or you could have quick 3 and outs with how Miami could match up against your offense. So I think Ohio State could also play the style they have been playing all year for 13 games, which is very slow, bleed the clock, and they could still win this thing by double digits. I think regardless of really what they do, I trust Ryan Day. I think Ohio State is the better team. I think the metrics preach to the fact that they are the better team here, and that's why I'm being a little bit more aggressive and bold with my prediction in general that, guys, Ohio State's not just going to win this thing. They're going to look like the better team. The game won't really be in doubt. Will it be a blowout? No. But it also won't be close either on film. Ohio State will tie or lead this game through all 60 minutes, and they will cover that 9.5 points because of their run defense, their defense overall. They will get some pressure on Beck. And while I believe Ohio State won't run the ball all that well, and they'll give up sacks and pressures to Miami, I think they will have some plays where their receivers get behind Miami's safeties or behind their corners, or they win some one-on-one balls there, or maybe whether it's Max Clare or Bo Jackson or Brandon Innes, one of their non-top 2 players on offense will make some plays against this Miami defense, and that combined with turnovers will give Ohio State a convincing Cotton Bowl win. Those are my bold predictions for the Cotton Bowl. Okay, delayed on flipping to that because I knew I didn't turn off the countdown timer. That's my own fault. Let's get on to some bold predictions about the Orange Bowl. This is an interesting game. It's close. My read on this game has solidly been in one camp, but it's also been, how do I put this? I've been on the Oregon side of the Orange Bowl matchup for really ever since the line released, and actually before that, when I thought it was pretty obvious Oregon would beat James Madison. However, I've never been extremely confident in an Oregon victory. So I've never really wavered on my pick, even in my mind, about thinking Oregon was going to win this game. Thought that was the case when the initial rankings and seeds were released. Thought that was the case after the JMU game. But Tech's a different animal, man. Tech is like a unique, exotic species where they don't fulfill the BCR, which is exotic to be a title contender, to be in the quarterfinals or beyond that, and to be power rated as high as you are without a BCR. Same as Indiana. But Indiana at least has, NFL quarterback, possibly double-digit amounts of draft picks for this upcoming draft, since they're so old and have been developed really well. They at least have that. Tech is also kind of a different animal because of how elite their defense is in terms of turnovers and pressure, in a combination that no one else has in America. Even Indiana, who's very, very close to them there, at least in terms of metrics. And their offense does have some issues. So we are witnessing a game where Oregon is only favored by 2.5. My prediction, as it always has been, is that they will win and cover, whether it's 1.5, whether it's 2.5. I think that Oregon covers that line. But I do have some bold predictions, and some of them relate to how Texas Tech could actually come out on top in this game. Because Tech is this, I like using the term exotic animal, especially since, Texas, a big state, lots of biodiversity. Lubbock is out in kind of the middle of nowhere in a sense. I just like that. And Texas Tech is unique because they're really the only team in the Big 12, and you could even include the ACC along with Miami. They're the only teams that can really win it all in the foreseeable future that are outside of the SEC and Big Ten, which is kind of sad, but also kind of cool and unique. Texas Tech does have that ceiling. And I believe they're going to win the time of possession battle. Straight up. I think that at the end of this game, despite picking Oregon to win, Tech is going to win the time of possession. And that might translate to them running more plays. That could translate to them having more yards total, having more sustainable drives. I've been on Oregon to win this game for a while, but I've always said it's going to be very competitive and razor thin. And one area where I think Tech has an edge is how their offense matches up with Oregon's defense versus the other way around. Oregon should have a big play edge here. Tech, I think, should have the sustainability edge because their pass protection against Oregon's pass rush is more neutral and mellow and, milk toast. It's just kind of meh. It's boring because it's just, Tech might sputter out on their own or give up a sack here and there, but they should do okay in pass protection. Oregon's O-line versus Tech's pass rush is that's the exciting eye candy stuff. Where if Oregon somehow dominates Tech's pass rush, you're thinking, holy cow, well, that's the best O-line in America. They are underrated to win the national title. You could also see Tech just bull rush that O-line and they win the game straight up because they get 6 or 7 sacks. Because of that, I'm kind of hedging my potential outcomes here. And I think that Tech, with a more consistent ability to protect the quarterback and a more consistent ability to move the football because they won't be facing as many negative or as many attempts at their opponent creating negative plays as Oregon will, they'll win the TOP battle and advance the football down the field. When looking at these two teams, Oregon has an edge in havoc plays over Tech. And Oregon should get pressure here. I don't think Texas Tech will totally protect Brycen Moore. But I think that with their late down success rate, their ability to create some explosive passing plays, and Oregon at times has struggled with that, see USC, see Indiana. They also at times have, struggled in, low scoring contests where if their offense is limited, the defense is not this titan such as Indiana's or Ohio State's or Texas Tech's are, metrically at least, to where they should be able to hold up and win games on their own. Oregon's defense is close to that, but I don't think they're quite that good. They're not in that upper tier. And you can put sustainable drives on them. And I think that if Texas Tech is within striking distance and their defense can do their job, they can put together sustainable drives here. And Oregon, I believe, will also try to use tempo. And if Texas Tech's run defense is legit, they'll be forced to throw more, even more than Texas Tech. And I think that could result in some incompletions and 3-and-outs. Looking at bold prediction number 2, Texas Tech will win the rushing yard battle here. I also think they'll win the yards per carry battle. And a lot of this has to do with sacks. I think Tech will earn more sacks, but I also believe they will earn more sack yards because Dante Moore with his legs will want to scramble, will want to try to find things downfield, and it would not shock me at all if David Bailey and Romello Height work Harkey and World. I think the interior is a bit trickier, where Oregon should have an edge interior O-line versus D tackle, but not a huge edge. And you got to remember that Rodriguez and Roberts are behind that defensive front. Tech, I think, at both linebacker and D-line is better than Oregon here. And both of these rushing attacks are centered around explosives, but especially Oregon's. Where if you can limit the explosive run from Oregon, you can really mess with what their offense wants to do. They do like to try to get a lot of those big plays. Tech is more content just, spread shotgun, run it up the middle. And I think that is a probably better strategy given the defense they are playing here than what Oregon's standard strategy is going to be. So Tech wins rushing yards and yards per carry and TOP. Usually I would roll with that and say, okay, they're going to win. But you also have to remember that Tech, and we'll get to this, but think about it this way. Tech in the red zone has not been very successful at scoring touchdowns. I mean, you look at, Tech, their explosive percentage matched up with Oregon's pretty similar. You look at their third and fourth down success rate, it's pretty successful, but you look at their average third down distance and it's pretty far out. And when they don't have a successful play on third down, it results in a fourth down, and usually a fourth down that's an incompletion more so than anything else, and they're forced to settle for field goals. Oregon, I don't think, will have that exact same problem. I think that Oregon, because of their athletic edge and because of their more explosive rushing attack and because they have better QB play, I think will have an easier time scoring touchdowns in the red zone than Texas Tech will. Also goes to show that neither rushing attack here I think will do well. I think Texas Tech, when you look at sack numbers, will probably get 3 to 3.5 yards per carry. I think Oregon will get around 3. So it's just a slight edge to Tech there. Quarterback play and tight end play and receiver play and how that matches up with the DBs will matter a lot here. And while Texas Tech should have some edges in the passing attack against Oregon's DBs, I also think Oregon will have some edges against Texas Tech's defensive backs. And that's bold prediction number 3, where really I think the game is won for Oregon. They have 2 40-plus yard touchdowns. One of them will be a pass. The other one I'm not sure. Could be a punt return. Could be a rushing, like a rush, long touchdown run. Could also be a pass again. They will get 2 big touchdown plays, and they'll win because of these. I don't think Oregon is scoring more than 2 or 3 touchdowns here. I don't think Oregon will consistently drive it against this defense for a variety of reasons. I mean, they couldn't do it against Indiana, guys. They could not. Oregon was lucky to score 20. That was in their own house, and while I think Moore has learned some lessons and they are probably better at some things, I don't know if Decorian Moore is as healthy as he was then. I don't know if their receivers are as healthy as they were. And remember in that game, like for Indiana, Stephen Daly wasn't even playing all that much because Wyatt was still I think Wyatt was still healthy for part of that game. So teams grow, teams evolve, but Tech is better at forcing these turnovers than Indiana is by a little bit. I do think Indiana has the actually like decently better defense, but Tech's also better at raw pass rush, especially with David Bailey, who would be the best pass rusher on either team. So I don't think they'll consistently drive the football, but I do think they have the explosive edge and the athletic edge and the quarterback accuracy edge to get one of these touchdowns going, especially when under duress and in a big game like this. Looking at the numbers here, one area where Oregon's offense actually has an edge over Tech's defense is rush explosive percentage. And pass explosive percentage is similar. Explosive plays overall, Oregon has an edge in over Tech's defense. When you look at, EPA per dropback and yards per dropback, Tech does have an edge there. A lot of that, though, has to do with Oregon playing a tougher schedule, Oregon playing like Indiana's defense, Penn State's before injuries and before the team quit, and also playing Iowa. And Washington's defense is okay. Tech has played worse offenses than Oregon has played defenses, if that makes sense. And a lot of Tech's success in these metrics has to do with their front doing so much to opposing quarterbacks that they can't even take advantage of some things they might have going through them through the air. So I believe that Oregon will have, not their way, but create enough explosive plays to where I have a very hard time seeing Tech blow Oregon out. I also have a hard time seeing Oregon blow Tech out, but I think there is a world where that's realistic. Not common, though, certainly not picking it. Both teams combined will have 8 or more sacks. That's another bold prediction I have. They will get tons of pressure. Morton and Moore will be running for their life. Their pants will be on fire. Their helmets and jerseys and pants will be stained. I don't know how much they will be in hell, just from an overall, defensive angle. I think that Patricia schematically is going to put back in a blender. I think that Miami is just good enough from a D-line versus O-line, and Sayan is young enough to where Sayan could, have the, stars circling around his head in that game. I think both of these quarterbacks are veteran enough, and both passing attacks have enough of an edge against these DBs to where that's not going to totally happen here, but it can be close, and there's a possibility that happens. Both teams will get tons of pressure. These offenses will constantly be operating behind the chains. I like Tech more there from a sustainable drive angle, but again, circling back, I like Oregon's offense to score touchdowns more than Tech's. So this will be a very interesting game where I think there's a good chance that the team that has more yards and moves the football more in Tech might end up settling for more field goals, and that costs the game where Oregon steals one and is able to win with big plays. Oregon is the better team, I believe. Tech has some matchup edges here that I think, along with their staff continuity, because both of Oregon's coordinators are leaving, there are some things that favor Tech in this neck of the woods. Special teams also favors Tech. And that's a big part of my prediction where I believe that Tech will have better field position. That will make them call the game in a more normal, aggressive way. And I think that Tech could pin Oregon deep a few times, and that will force some 3-and-outs and put Oregon's defense in a bend, but don't break position, kinda. The final bold prediction I have is that the point total will be under 42. Much like the Cotton Bowl that comes the night before, the starter to New Year's Day, I think, will be a very low-scoring game. If I had to make a prediction right now, it would be Oregon 23, Texas Tech 19 is what my prediction would be. So Oregon kicking 3 field goals and scoring 2 touchdowns, and Texas Tech will score a touchdown and 4 field goals. Or we could ratchet it up, and heck, I think Oregon could walk away from this game scoring, say, They could walk away scoring like 21-16. That could be the final score here, where Texas Tech kicks 3 field goals and gets a touchdown. Or maybe all Texas Tech does is kick field goals because they're within striking distance, and all Oregon does is score touchdowns. There's also a world where that happens, believe me. It will be a very low scoring game. I think that because both teams have explosive play potential, but both teams have had some issues with red zone, um, I think that those things combined play into Oregon's favor here. I think Tech would really have to dominate TOP and just straight up look like the clearly better team. Um, or not clearly better team, but they would have to show they're truly equal to Oregon to win. I don't while Tech has matchup edges over Oregon, I don't think those matchup edges will win them the game unless they are actually at the same level or better than Oregon. The matchup edges are not great enough for the inferior team here to win, I don't think. It's going to be a very close game, I think, even though I personally believe Oregon's the better team. It will be very close and back and forth because of Tech's matchup edges, but it's not going to it's not going to throw a it's not going to throw a wrench into what Oregon wants to do. The matchup edges will also keep this close in Texas Tech's favor. Tech has the better defense. I do think Tech's defense is the best unit on the field in this game, followed closely by Oregon's offense, then closely by Oregon's defense. There's a pretty sizable drop-off to Tech's offense, and that is why I believe Oregon will win and cover, is they're just going to score more touchdowns here. And a huge part of that will be because they're the better team and they're the more athletic team at receiver and at defensive back to prevent those big passing plays, and their quarterback is much better. I think Dante Moore is a much better quarterback than Baron Morton, especially with how he is playing right now. But would I be shocked by a Texas Tech victory? No. I could also see a world where the pass rush is too much. Oregon's rushing offense is maybe a bit of a paper tiger in this game, or they just stylistically don't match up well with Tech's run defense, and they're too behind the chains to do all that much. And Tech has 40 minutes of TOP and wins with a ton of field goals and shuts down Oregon's offense. There's also a world for that. But it's going to be it's going to be a fun game. It's going to be a blast. I can't wait to watch it and to do a live show on it. We're going to be live for a few games. So Cotton Bowl, Orange Bowl, Rose Bowl. We're going to be live for those 3. We're going to be covering them. I will do an instant reaction for the Rose Bowl, and I will do an instant reaction for the Cotton Bowl. Orange Bowl's just in that weird spot where, like, right when it ends, the Rose Bowl should begin. So I might do that instant reaction, like, after the Rose Bowl is done. And then I'll watch Georgia Ole Miss, do an instant reaction on that, and then Friday we'll have our live show, maybe at a different time throughout the day. Someone said Josh Pate is 0-4 in picking Indiana games this year. Sam is 3-1. It was the same thing with Michigan in 2023. I was undefeated in picking those games, and Pate only picked one of them properly. Pate was also on Oregon with me in the Rose Bowl last year. No bueno. We were both, I think, 3-1 in picking Ohio State games in the college football playoff last year. Both 3-1. I honestly kind of expect something similar. I think that he's kind of on crack for thinking that Alabama's going to beat Indiana. Not that they can't, but channels are supposed, like, you can only go with narratives for so long. You can only do that. And his thing where he kept picking against Michigan and then he picked him to beat Ohio State and then he flipped his pick last minute, that was just kind of like come on. Like, you can't pick Michigan to finally win because you've had a problem picking them. You have to do it from an analytical angle. And it's the same thing with Indiana. Like, I understood picking Oregon to beat IU. I did. I picked Indiana to cover. I'm 4-0 in picking Indiana to cover in big games. Let's forget about picking them to cover against Penn State and Iowa, though. I was wrong there. But like I get that. And I got picking Ohio State against them. Like, hey, analytically to that point, Ohio State and IU were similar, and you could use the like talent thing as a tiebreaker, and the fact that Ohio State had more first rounders as a tiebreaker to win. For Oregon, but before we knew Indiana, before we knew with full confidence they could scale what they wanted to do against a very talented roster, it was understandable to pick them to lose to Oregon. It'd be understandable today if someone picked them to lose in the rematch. It would. But picking them to lose to Illinois is like you, if your full-time job is college football, I do not know how you picked Illinois to win that game. Straight up. I don't. If that is your full-time job, is college football related, and you picked Illinois, whatever you are using for research, just throw it out the window. Just do that. Throw it out. Or, like, that was just a very bad move on your part. And then for Alabama, Indiana, Alabama's just not as good as Oregon. And they're certainly not as good as Ohio State. And any metric, any power rating, film will tell you that. Oregon has issues on offense. Alabama can't run the ball. They can't. They haven't been able to do it for 14 games. Why are they going to do it in their 15th game against Indiana when Indiana's had a rest edge over them? Alabama defensively has had issues against mobile QBs. Why has Georgia in every matchup scored 20 plus on them? Why was Georgia able to move the football okay against them in the SEC title game? Why did Florida State de-pants them? Why was Auburn able to do all right against them in the Iron Bowl? Why could John Mateer make that offense do some things early in the first round? Mendoza has that. And he actually has a much better offense than any of those teams except for maybe Georgia. And they probably have a higher ceiling and a greater capacity to create explosive plays than Georgia does for touchdowns. So that's my thing. Like, I admire Pate. I do. He runs a better operation than I do for now. Hopefully one day that'll be different. I think it's possible. But when I sit here and when I look at this game and when I analyze it, I just, guys, like I've picked every Ohio State game perfectly this year, the big ones, in terms of winner. Spread has been inconsistent, but it's hard to nail spread. I have picked Indiana near perfectly in their bigger matchups in terms of winner. Spread, again, imperfect. Like, I picked Miami to beat Notre Dame. I picked Texas to beat Oklahoma. I picked Georgia to beat Texas. I cannot figure out Alabama, Georgia. I cannot do it. I can't. Can't do it. And you know what's so disgusting? At one point in those games, I'm getting off topic. I need to get back on topic. In those games, I had it right at one point. Like in round one of that game, at one point I was leaning Alabama. Didn't change the pick in time. And early on, I was reading Georgia in the SEC title game. And I didn't go with it. So, whatever. Just whatever. It's just the whole, like, the whole thing where, you know, Alabama's going to beat Indiana because of BCR and because of offensive line size. It's so disingenuous. It's so bad. It truly is so bad. There is a point where if Indiana gets hurt again at certain key positions, the whole thing could fall apart from can they win the title standpoint. But it's not going to happen in game one where they're healthy outside of lefty end. Alabama's O-line has not been good at protecting the quarterback against inferior pass rushes and inferior defenses. They haven't, you know, it hasn't worked. It hasn't. So why is it going to work against IU? I don't know. Like, Southern talent, I guess, which, hey, is it relevant? Yeah. Is it relevant in big games against teams that also have proven development? Not really, guys. Alabama's blue chip ratio is infinitely better than Indiana's. Indiana has more 2026 draft selections than Alabama has. They do. Indiana's older. They are. Indiana's some of Indiana's second stringers on defense are more proven than Alabama's second stringers on defense and look better and tackle better and are smarter and have better fundamentals. Does that stuff not matter all of a sudden? It's stupid. It's asinine. It's bad analysis. It's the same thing with that talking point is the same as Miami's defensive line being full of 4 and 5 stars and Ohio State's offensive line being like a bunch of mid-range 4 stars or 3 stars or lower. Like, dude, that could mean something. And in that case, I think, Miami's D-line has an edge over OSU's O-line. But that's because of what the units have produced on the field. To this point in the year, on-field production matters more than blue-chip talent. The reason the blue-chip ratio has been successful is because most of the time, blue-chip talent causes on-field success. When blue-chip talent at universities that don't develop does not produce on-field success, their blue-chip talent doesn't matter all the time anymore because there's inconsistent results. When you have a team that is performing well despite not having a ton of blue-chip talent, yeah, there might be some limitations there, but if they keep performing well, and if they have players step up with depth, even though in theory that is close to impossible, it's just a fact of nature now with that team. Doesn't mean they're the best, doesn't mean they have the highest ceiling, but you can't discount what they do. You have to take into account present results, and BCR is... I don't know. It's super, super duper valuable. There's a reason IU isn't the favorite to win the title, and BCR does play into that a little bit, along with the fact that if Ohio State were not the favorite to win it all, the public would be immediately hammering them to do so. They have to balance the books. But there's a reason they're ahead of Alabama. There's a reason they're favored to beat Alabama. Anyway, let's get on to bold predictions for the Sugar Bowl, and then we'll get on to the Rose Bowl, and we'll have a lot of fun with those Rose Bowl bold predictions. I don't think that Ole Miss has much of a chance here, guys, against Georgia. And maybe that's ignorant, maybe that's foolish, though I am confident that Georgia wins and covers that 6.5-point spread. I do think there's a world where Ole Miss covers. But I have a very hard time seeing a world where Ole Miss wins, and let me show you why. So, first bold prediction here, outside of the one where I think Ole Miss doesn't have much of a chance despite only being a touchdown underdog, is that Georgia has made defensive improvements, and they've improved as a team throughout the year. Meanwhile, Ole Miss probably has a little bit of staff turmoil behind the scenes. Ole Miss, I don't think, has improved throughout the year. I think they've been a pretty similar team from day one. And they do have Chambliss, who's wonderful. But a big part of their success has also been Kawan Lacey, who's been one of the better running backs in America, could be one of the best. I think Georgia's defensive line is going to shut down Ole Miss's O-line. And that is going to... They kind of did that in the first game, but Lacey and Chambliss got some things going, and Georgia could not move Ole Miss's O-line in pass rush situations. I think it's going to be different here. I think that Georgia will have a more decisive lines of scrimmage edge against Ole Miss the second time around. I think they're going to do a better job limiting the run game, and consequentially, Ole Miss will be behind the chains more. They'll have to throw the football more. That could result in same outcome as last time, but it also could result in a bunch of 3-and-outs and Georgia totally controlling this game. So hedging those outcomes, Georgia should have a greater edge here. And when you look at how Georgia has stopped the run and how they have, stuffed their opponents and how they've improved throughout the year, watching them against Texas, watching them against Alabama, watching them against Georgia Tech, this defense is a better unit than it was earlier in the year, than it was in September, October. And I think that's going to translate here in the Sugar Bowl. Another bold prediction is that Georgia gets 3 sacks. We already kind of talked about this in the first one. The pass rush has improved for Georgia. I love what their linebackers offer. Kirby Smart, when it comes to game prepping and planning, has always done a good job of throwing exotic looks, of coming up with new things and new avenues for creating adversity for opposing quarterbacks and offenses. And I believe that they're going to get 3 sacks. Could they get more? Could they get less? Sure. Just because it's a bold prediction, we're going to go with at least 3. If they get more, then it still kind of fulfills the prediction. I was just maybe a little bit too conservative here. In terms of creating havoc plays, Georgia's been pretty poor at that. They don't create a lot of turnovers. They don't get a lot of pressure. They have been improving in those areas, especially the pass rush, as the season's gone on. This is a defense that in ESPN's efficiency metrics earlier this year was in the 30s. Now they're inside the top 15. So they have steadily been getting better. And I just don't think that for the second time around that Kirby Smart is going to get de-pantsed again, because Ole Miss did de-pants their defense for 3 quarters. They scored 35 points. And I don't think that's going to be the case here. I don't. I mean, Georgia doesn't allow many explosives. I think Georgia has also improved at DB and on the D line as the season's gone on. I just think Ole Miss will have a tougher time moving the football. I think Georgia will make some adjustments as much as they can for Chambliss, who I still think will have a somewhat successful day, but not enough of a successful day to cover, not enough to win Ole Miss another college football playoff game. The third bold prediction is that Georgia rushes for about 300 yards. That is very bold. It's hard to run for 300 yards, especially in the modern era with new clock rules. It'd be much easier with pre-2023 clock rules. But Georgia, I think, will be aggressive, and I think that early on in this game, they will know that they can win and win handily. And I think that consequentially, they will run the ball, try to control this thing, try to limit injuries, limit plays, and get on to the Ohio State game. With Nate Frazier and with Drew Bobo and with that offensive line, I see them moving around an Ole Miss run defense that is pretty much non-existent. And you can see that in Ole Miss's rushing EPA per play. It's 132nd in America. That is one of the worst in America. It is, I think, the worst in the power conferences. They do not have an edge in line yards or in stuffing the run. They do a very good job of preventing explosive passing plays, but I think a part of that too is teams don't have to try for explosive passing plays against the defense. You can very easily dink and dunk on them, and you can run the ball pretty effectively on them. So actually having a quote-unquote conservative game plan, I think, is an avenue to be aggressive here. And I think Georgia will run the football aggressively. I think they will run Gunnar Stockton. I think they'll have more success on the ground this time around than they did earlier. And consequentially, they will, win pretty convincingly here, and they'll be able to control the clock. I would not be shocked if they had a 40-20 TOP advantage at the end. I also believe that Gunnar Stockton plays well. I do believe that. Stockton is one of the best quarterbacks in America. Is he the best? No. But is he very efficient? Absolutely. He delivers the football on time. He escapes the pocket when he's under duress and picks up extra yards or throws the football away. And he's doing better than a lot of people thought he would preseason. I'm happy to admit that I was one who thought he would be at least a top 25 quarterback and that Georgia would just be A-okay with him, that he'd kind of be to them what Stetson Bennett was to them. And I think that's panning out in a way. Not quite as effective as Bennett was, but then again, Bennett had a much better supporting cast than Stockton has had. And then last, but certainly not least here. So Georgia, I get that on paper, Ole Miss should be able to defend pretty well against them in the passing game. But when you look at the non-explosive EPA per play, Georgia doesn't like to be super explosive. They're very good offensively at earning successful plays when they're not explosive. They're a very consistent multiple methodical offense. It's a perfect Kirby Smart offense. Mike Bobo, I think it's him or Indiana defensive coordinator Bryant Haynes that deserves the Broyles Award. I think it's one of them. Those have been the top two coordinators in football this year, Mike Bobo and Bryant Haynes. And there are honorable mentions for several others, but those have been the top two. And you also have to remember that Stockton is a part of the run game, too. And they will have an edge there against Ole Miss. Last but not least, Georgia wins by 10 plus. That's my final bold prediction. I just think Kirby Smart's too much for Pete Golding. And I believe that Georgia's going to have success. Georgia's going to win. I like them a lot here to win and to cover and to have a good day and to advance to the Fiesta Bowl in a highly anticipated rematch that people have wanted since last year, since 2023. And it didn't happen those years because Michigan messed some things up and then Notre Dame messed some things up. Now I think it's very likely to happen, as I'm pretty convinced that Ohio State's going to beat Miami, and I'm even more convinced that Georgia is going to beat Ole Miss. They're going to do it handily because of a coaching edge, a line of scrimmage edge, and because Kirby Smart learns his lessons and is one of the best adaptive, or one of the most adaptive head coaches in all of college football. Tripping over my words there a bit. My apologies in that regard. Okay, we can get on to Indiana and Alabama. And yes, I remember when last year people were calling for Bobo to be fired. I forget if I were one of those people or not. I don't think I called for him to be fired, but I think I certainly questioned him. I probably shouldn't have done that, but I was a very early adapter this year to him doing well. Very, very early adapter. Very early. Where, like, by late September, I thought to myself, okay, yeah, this guy's not the problem. And it took a lot of people until, I would say, November or the SEC title game. Like, a lot of people didn't think Georgia would win 12 games before the playoff. I was actually someone who predicted them to go 12-1. I think preseason I had them losing to either Alabama or Auburn. They nearly lost to both of them. No, I had them losing to Georgia Tech. I know I had them losing to Tech for a fact. Actually, that was a close game too. Never really in doubt, though, I think, for Georgia. But I did predict them to win the SEC in the preseason. So there's that. Every other conference victor I got, I picked wrong. Ashamed of that. Ashamed of that for sure. But anyway, I want to, I don't want to be up until midnight live streaming. I got to move tomorrow. I'm hoping that won't take too long. That should be one of the final times I do have to help my family move, so schedule should be a little bit more in line. Let's get on, though, and talk about Indiana and the Rose Bowl against Alabama. How do I put this? That's what I'm trying to think about, is how do I formulate this game? It's tough. It's very, very tough. I want to have a really striking intro. And a really like a really striking intro, and one that just like speaks to the heart of so many people. Oh man. Man, oh man, oh man. Oh man. All right. Screw it. I'm going to double down. I'm going to double down. I'm just going to do it. I'm going to double down and say that with 10 out of 10 confidence that Indiana wins this game, and they not just win, but they will cover 6.5 or 7.5 in this game. Does Alabama have a path to victory here? Yes, of course they do. That's why they're not double-digit underdogs. But I believe when looking at the metrics, when watching the film, when studying how the strength of schedules compare, when studying who Indiana's played versus who Alabama's played, studying who Alabama lost to and how and where they're vulnerable versus the games where Indiana won but it was close and how they're vulnerable, it all leads me to believe personally that even if Indiana, because of whether it's the blue chip ratio or limited depth, even if they cannot win it all, and I think they can, but there are some people I respect who don't think they will or can, or the odds are very slim. Even if that is the case, they're going to win this game and they're going to get it done. And I want to go through why and introduce some bold predictions there. So, bold prediction 1 is that Alabama will have negative rushing yards when you factor in sacks. Alabama can't run the ball. And teams that can't run the ball don't win these big games, or they can't win them in a sustainable way. So against Oklahoma, they got away with it because Oklahoma is basically Iowa on steroids and turned over the football. And Oklahoma's secondary is a very vulnerable group if you know how to attack it. Texas, Ole Miss, Alabama the first time when they weren't throwing picks, and especially Alabama the second time, showed us this. Indiana, we've seen them against a healthy Oregon offense. We've seen them against Ohio State. They did a pretty good job. They held those teams to 23 combined offensive points, an average of 11.5 points per game between those two offenses. Huge part of the reason why is they weren't perfect against those receiver cores or quarterbacks, but they were good enough at confusing them, at putting them off platform, off their feet, and covering the receivers and tight ends to where drives fizzled out and the quarterbacks had to make tough decisions, and not all of them went in their favor. Alabama can't take any pressure off of their quarterback because they can't run the ball. Ohio State struggles at running, but they at least have Bo Jackson, who can create yards after contact. Their offensive line can at least occasionally create a hole where their running back can leap through or get 4 or 5 yards and create a successful run. They at least can do that sometimes. They have an average rushing offense. Alabama's, let me read you some numbers for this Alabama offense. It is dreadful. It is a dreadfully bad rushing offense. And I've heard a lot about Alabama's size in the offensive line. Oh, and big Caden Proctor and Parker Brailsford and all this. It's nonsense. It's absolutely nonsense. They have not been able to run the football for 14 games. What makes you think against a team that is 4th in adjusted EPA per play margin, a team that is 12th in adjusted EPA per play margin defensively, and they're probably a bit underrated there because they started the year off pretty slow, a team that only allows 4.2 yards per carry, that generates an 18.7% havoc rate, and that is top 3 in ESPN's efficiency defensively, top 2 in FEI defense, I believe, and number 1 in FEI. What makes you think Indiana's the team that Alabama gets right against? That's illogical. That doesn't make sense. Indiana held Ohio State. And for context, Ohio State, when you look at their rushing offense, let's just go with rushing success rate for now. Ohio State is 60th in rushing success rate. Alabama averages 4.76 yards per carry. Their EPA per rush is literally average. It's 0. Like it's not below, it's not above, it's the expected EPA of the average college football team. It is the definition of an average rushing attack. Pure and simple. They ran for negative 0.62 EPA per rush. When they got inside the 20, they could not run the ball to save their life. They could occasionally run the ball behind their own 50, very rarely though, and they gave up more TFLs than they had explosive runs. And also they were constantly behind the chains due to, Indiana getting pressure, Indiana beating them physically at the lines of scrimmage. How is Alabama's rushing attack, that is 131st in rushing success with a 34.8%, only ahead of LSU and West Virginia in the power conferences, and they only average 4.1 yards per carry? How are they going to run on Indiana when Oregon couldn't and when Ohio State couldn't? Look at this defensive profile here for Indiana. They have the superior passing defense to Alabama's passing offense, and their run defense is, my goodness, it is so far ahead of Alabama's rushing offense that you got to consider if Alabama should just try to not run the ball and really air this out and go pass heavy. That was the only way they were able to open up the run against Oklahoma, is they had success through the air, and it opened up the run game just a little bit enough for Daniel Hill to get really the only successful run Alabama had for the whole day in that first round game. Alabama won't run the ball here. They will probably give up more TFLs than yards gained on their longest carry. And when you factor in sacks, it's stupid, but in college football, sacks count against rushing yards. They'll have negative rushing yards, just like the loser of the last Rose Bowl did in Oregon against Ohio State. And I think the line of scrimmage matchup with Alabama and their O-line against Indiana's D-line and defensive front, I think actually profiles pretty similarly to last year's Oregon O-line against the Ohio State defensive front in that game, where I just think you're going to have a hell of a time moving that defense. It's not going to work. Alabama will get negative rushing yards here. Bold prediction number 2, and this ties into this, is Simpson is sacked 5 times or more. Dante Moore was sacked 6 times. Julian Sayin was sacked 5 times. Alabama's offensive line is worse in run blocking and pass blocking by quite a bit compared to Oregon's. I would say it's worse in pass blocking and run blocking than OSU's, though much closer to OSU's than Oregon's on the O-line. Simpson is also not as evasive as Sayin. He doesn't see the field as well. He doesn't sense pressure as well. So even with Daly out, I think he's going to be an absolute hell. And he's just going to get thrown to the ground. He's going to have the life beaten out of him. I don't think this game will be, a blowout. A lot of what I'm saying would indicate that I might think that way. But I have respect for Alabama. I have respect for Kalen DeBoer. I do think they're a good team, maybe even a great team. Indiana just matches up very well with them, where IU has a big line of scrimmage advantage on both sides of the football. Indiana has the superior quarterback, the superior special teams. Indiana tackles better. And Indiana has the better pass rush. They do. Daly would be the best defensive end on both of these teams. And I'm pretty sure Michael Kamara would be the second best D end on both of these teams from a college angle. It probably would be Tyreek Tucker and Tim Keenan the third, starting on a combined D line of these two teams. Like, even with the BCR favoring Alabama, Indiana has more starting players that will be drafted in this upcoming draft than Alabama, or at least a similar number, and Indiana has played better. And again, even though Alabama's done a good job at limiting havoc plays offensively, Indiana's better than Alabama in a percentile sense at creating havoc plays. Indiana should also shut down Alabama's rushing attack completely, which means Indiana should be able to tee off in pass rush. They should be able to expect obvious passing downs over and over again. And even if Alabama decides, hey, let's mix in a draw to prevent him from teeing off, is that going to do anything? Because Alabama can't create holes. Again, they can't run the ball even at an okay level. They're a bad rushing offense. They're horrific. So I'm very convinced here that Indiana's going to win. And if Alabama does somehow win, it's because of what their defense does against Indiana's offense. I do not think they're going to win because they come alive in the ground game or they protect Simpson all day long. I don't think that's going to happen. I think Indiana, one thing Indiana has struggled at is giving up explosive plays, especially through the air. But they also have struggled at, sometimes they let their opponents get into third and medium a little bit too much. They should not have that problem against Alabama at all because Alabama can't run the football. And a huge part of average third down distance is what your, run defense does. And Indiana is sometimes very boom or bust. So, they can, miss a guy or let him get yards after contact or sometimes give an explosive play. But they rarely do that because they're so disciplined. And against a team as one-dimensional as Alabama, I don't think they'll have a problem getting 3 and outs and getting sacks and possibly even forcing turnovers. Another piece of this that I want to discuss is the Rose Bowl is likely going to be a rainy, wet environment for one of the first times in its history. Alabama can't run the ball. Weather especially affects the passing game. Indiana can run. Again, going back to rushing success rate, Alabama has a 34.8% rushing success rate, which is 131st. Indiana has a 47.2% rushing success rate, which is 6th. Indiana averages 5.89 yards per carry. Alabama averages 4.1. Sorry, guys. It is a bad mismatch there. Rushing offenses don't play each other, but let's look at rushing defenses. Indiana only allows a 37.6% rushing success rate. Alabama allows a 37.7 rushing success rate. But there's more. Let's look at yards per carry, which can, reveal maybe explosive runs. Indiana only allows opponents to average 4.18 yards per carry, and that's even with some long touchdown runs they gave up to Old Dominion earlier in the year that kind of underrate their numbers in run defense. Alabama gives up 4.8 yards per carry. And that's with them playing Oklahoma, can't run the ball to save their life. That's with them playing a Georgia team who runs the ball very well, but they don't get a lot of explosives. That's with them, playing a Wisconsin team that couldn't do anything on the ground, playing a Florida State team that does well from a yards basis, but went 5-7. And Auburn couldn't move the ball all that well, and yet, Auburn was able to run on these guys a little bit. So I think that Indiana here is primed to have a big day on the ground. If they have issues passing, and they might, because Alabama's secondary it'll either be them or Ohio State that is the best secondary Indiana's played all year. Indiana can run, and they will run. And because it's a playoff game, if they have to run Mendoza quite a bit and have him take some hits, they will. And I think with Black and with Hemby and with Pat Coogan, the interior of that O-line, Carter Smith, Khalil Benson, Indiana will run for 200 or more yards here. And they'll be able to control the clock. They'll be able to extend drives. They have the better special teams, too. So if this turns into a field goal match, Indiana will make their kicks, and Alabama probably won't. There's so much here. There's so much that favors not a Freudian slip, just talking fast, thinking fast. There's so much that favors Alabama to get dominated here. There's so much that favors Indiana. And whether it is with Indiana's offense against Alabama's defense, whether it is line yards, whether it is stuff percentage, whether it is average distance on third down, which Indiana's first there, their average distance on third down is like 5.5 yards. So they can very easily create fourth down opportunities. They're excellent at power rushing and making sure to rarely surrender TFLs or fall forward for a few yards. They have a high rushing success rate. I think they're going to have a great day on the ground against Alabama, especially considering what I think they'll do to Alabama's offense, and that'll create more opportunities and drives for Indiana to wear down an Alabama defense that I actually think is quite underrated. I think that Alabama's defense has been the better side of the football this year. I think that Kane Womack has commanded the better side of the football for Alabama. Like their defense is their strength. It's what won them the game against Oklahoma, is making adjustments and getting that pick six and, forcing key punts. In Alabama's defense has won them games. That's one area where they are similar to Indiana, is you like to think offense is their specialty. And for Indiana, even it is. Their offense is one of the best in America. I think it's the best in the Big Ten. Might even be the best in America, but Georgia would have something to say about that. Their defense, though, is their best unit. And it's the same thing for Alabama, but against this offense, and knowing that they probably won't be able to have many plays against this Indiana defense, I question how long they can hold up. And I don't think they'll hold up all that well. Ohio State is a much better defense than Alabama. Oregon is a more efficient defense and a better offense than Alabama. And Indiana was able to move the football enough on them to, hey, score 30 points against Oregon. That's very impressive. In an alternate universe, they probably score low 20s against Ohio State if some other things go differently. Moving on to bold prediction number 4. For the first time in their big games, Indiana doesn't turn it over once. They've turned it over in Penn State, Iowa, Oregon, and Ohio State. I don't think they turned it over against Illinois. No, they did not. So it's their first big game from a rankings angle where they won't turn it over. Or it's their second game, because again, rankings, Illinois was ranked top 10 when they played them. It'll be their first game from an actual power ratings angle. Big game where they don't turn it over. And I think that's because they have a month to prepare. And stylistically, they will be more free, I think, to run the ball and to be more aggressive on defense than they usually are, because Alabama's offense is one-dimensional, and because Alabama's defense is going to be a run defense that is probably more along the Penn State side of things, like a little bit weaker than Iowa's, definitely weaker than Ohio State's, probably weaker than Oregon's, and they weren't healthy against Penn State when they were, trying to run the ball and run that offense. They weren't healthy on the O-line. Here they will be with a month to prepare, and Indiana with that coaching advantage and extra time to prepare, I think is really going to come out and put together a clean performance. And when you look at, again, the metrics here and their success rates and EPA stuff, and the fact that they're second in third and fourth down success and first in average third down distance, Mendoza sometimes turns it over here and there, but he also does a very good job of just finding the check down and averaging that out, with him also making one or two big plays per game. He is more of a help to Indiana's offense than a burden, even with his turnover habits in big games, which really is only just one turnover in each big game. That's actually not that bad when you think about it. It isn't. And I believe in this game, with all the preparation and all that time to rest, and they'll be their healthiest on offense probably for the whole season. Defense, not so much, but they're still pretty healthy on defense. I think they're going to come out and play a clean game, force some turnovers from Alabama, but not turn it over once here. It's bold, yes, but possible? I think so. And the final bold prediction here. Indiana wins by 10 plus. They win and cover due to being the better team. I would be more shocked if Alabama wins than I would be if Indiana, on their final drive of the fourth quarter, has their backups in. Say they're like up by 3 scores. They want to get some experience and rest some starters. The former would shock me more than the latter. Again, this will not be Ohio State, Oregon, Rose Bowl last year. That was just insane. I don't think Indiana has the ceiling of 2024 Ohio State. I do think last year's Oregon was better than this year's Alabama, but that game was just a lot of things going right for Ohio State. And Indiana doesn't. They also don't play that style. They don't have the same high octane-ness at certain parts of offense to quickly score in that fashion against this Alabama defense, especially since Ohio State had a higher ceiling offensively than Indiana does this year. Last year, though their floor was lower, and they were able to match up against an Oregon secondary that was a bad matchup for Oregon. This time around, Alabama's secondary actually matches up okay with Indiana's wideouts. Not great, because I think Omar Cooper Jr., Charlie Becker, and Elijah Surratt is one of the best wide receiver groups in America. It could go up against anyone, especially with Mendoza delivering it to them. But here, I think that IU will control this thing. I don't think they'll trail in this game. If they do, it will be briefly, and they'll come back with a storm. They're the better team. They're the more physical team. If you don't think Indiana's going to win it all and at some point they're going to stumble, it's going to be in a rematch with Oregon if Oregon beats Tech, or it's going to be against Georgia or Ohio State in the national title game. It won't be here. And just look at this. Look at the net stats. Look at the success rates. Look at the net EPA per play, which is like opponent adjusted. Indiana's better everywhere. The only position when these teams are healthy where I think Indiana would be at a disadvantage to Alabama is cornerback 2 and 1 or 2 of the safety spots. Every other position is an Indiana edge. Maybe wide receiver 3 would be better for Alabama too. And maybe tight end would be a push. But guys, IU has the better starting players. Some of their 2-deep players are better. They've done a better job developing. They've done a better job coaching. They have matchup edges here. Even if you think that IU cannot win it all, and there is a chance that is the case due to the history of national champions and recruiting and size and depth and all these different things, and the fact that IU would have to bust the BCR by basically beating 4 top 10 teams in a row. I can buy that. I have a friend who thinks that way. I totally respect it. If that is the case, it's not going to be this game. It's just not going to be this game. Alabama can get it done, again, because the spread and because their defense is good enough. But I would be shocked in the amount of people I see who think that Alabama will cover or Alabama will win or they'll all of a sudden come alive here because, they're getting hot. They have that fire like Ohio State did last year. Or, Indiana's been off for a month. They're not going to play well. They're going to be rusty. It's just, it is a load of crap. And I am willing to eat that if I'm wrong. I don't think I'll be wrong here. I'm very confident that Indiana is going to win. Very confident they're going to cover. This is not Saban's Alabama. This Alabama has a litany of issues. They have had horrible development on the offensive line. Their defense, while good, is not quite elite. They haven't played well since October. They have not. And Indiana has just continued to play at a pretty similar level, and they've avoided the injury plague. Alabama's healthier than they were in the first round, but are we sure they are perfectly healthy? Are we sure? I keep hearing all these things about Alabama where you're giving the Crimson Tide a lot of benefit of the doubt, like A+ benefit of the doubt in every possible area. I'm not even doing that. If I were giving Indiana A+ benefit of the doubt everywhere, I'd be saying they win by 17 or 21+. I wouldn't be saying 10+. I would also be saying that Indiana would probably run for a little bit more than 200 yards here. Alabama rushing for negative yards when factoring in sacks isn't even super bold. It happened against Georgia, and Georgia has had issues getting to the quarterback in a way Indiana has not. So those are my bold predictions for the Rose Bowl. We're very confident here on College Football with Sam that Indiana is going to win. They're going to cover. If there is an SEC team that is going to win it all, it will be Georgia. Georgia is the team that's underrated in metrics, and you should be scared of them. There is no way Alabama's underrated in metrics. No way. If anything, they might be pushed up by performances from 2 months ago and by their team talent composite, which factors into priors. And that's all I have to say. That's it. Thank you guys for coming on. Make sure, again, to like, make sure to subscribe, make sure to hit that notification bell. And I appreciate you guys watching. These clips will be up tomorrow. All 4 of these. I'm going to maybe export them tonight or tomorrow morning before I help my family move. And we'll try to go live tomorrow. Certainly one time tomorrow or Wednesday, definitely one of those days will go live. Going to try to go live both days, but again, not promising anything. I will see you all very soon. Have a great day. I'm going to try to be more organized with these live shows. I think we've done a better job at least consistently going live 3 days a week. And again, Wednesday and Thursday, we will be live for the first 3 quarterfinal games. And to your comment, JJ, like, I have a very hard time believing Alabama will beat Indiana, but Georgia can. As I mentioned, Alabama and Georgia are power rated very similarly in metrics. Those two teams are very different. Georgia is undervalued in metrics because they started the year very slow and off, but they've been peaking as the season's gone on. They've made progress. They've improved. In a way, it's almost like Walmart version of what Ohio State did last year, where Ohio State entering the playoffs was underrated in power ratings because of some bad performances they had, and therefore at the end of the year, power ratings didn't accurately reflect how much better they were than the rest of the field. That's kind of what's happening with Georgia here, where they've began to play their best football at the right time. Alabama played their best football in October and September. And I'm beginning to think that that was a bit of a mirage because of how slow Georgia was earlier in the year, because Tennessee got exposed to being a total paper tiger defensively, and Aguilar kind of stinks at quarterback. Vanderbilt is good, but Vanderbilt's only good within a certain context. And we saw against Texas that, like, Vanderbilt can get blown up. They're not quite a top 10 team, certainly not top 5. And Missouri, okay, Missouri's good, they're great, but Alabama has not beaten an elite team. They haven't. Like, you could say, sure, that Georgia hasn't either, but Georgia's pummeled the next level of teams. Georgia destroyed Alabama. They destroyed Texas. They've been playing like an elite team since mid-November. Indiana's beaten elite teams. They've beaten Ohio State, who is the favorite to win the title. Oregon is either in that next tier, and if you believe the analytics, they're actually elite too. What has Alabama done? They're a good team. I think DeBoer's a great coach. I think once he gets his players and his system and continues to adapt to the SEC world and probably makes coaching changes, he might still win a title there. It's not going to be this year, though. Not going to be this year. And you're welcome for noticing, you, JJ. I prefer to answer to only super chats, but if I see something interesting in the chat, I can't help myself. So I talk away about it. Make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, make sure to hit the notification bell, comment your thoughts down below. Thank you, Advantage Stock Trading, for engaging with me on Twitter, for engaging with me on YouTube. And yes, Hoosier Viking, I am going live during the Rose Bowl. I am, to do play-by-play. And last thing, in response to JJ, he said that he doesn't think Ohio State's going to repeat. I think they can, but I am actually in agreement with you that I'm kind of... So I picked Indiana to win it all. I'm kind of in the position where I think one of IU, Georgia, or OSU is going to win it all. And if I had to rank who I would pick, it would go Indiana, Georgia, and OSU in terms of who I would pick. I'd cycle from IU to OSU if I had to choose my favorite versus least favorite option of the 3. I will say I think Georgia probably has the highest odds of winning it all because of, the objective part of me has to factor in BCR, guys. Doesn't mean I have to pick BCR to continue to rule the sport. It will for the most part. Doesn't mean I have to pick it every year. But if I were to do... Excuse me there, I had to pass gas. If I had to... How do I put it? If I had to make objective odds that didn't factor in my eyeballs, I think Georgia should be the favorite to win it all. And then you'd probably have Indiana and Ohio State almost tied for second, but IU with a slight edge due to not having to play one of Ohio State or Georgia until the Natty. That's kind of how I would set it. Yeah. That's that's kind of what I'm thinking in that sense. I am picking IU to win it all. I'm not gonna back off that until I see Indiana play, and until I see the other field play, and then I can base my prediction off of it. But yeah, that's kind of my logic as to who's going to win it all. If someone busts those three, it will be the winner of the Orange Bowl. It will be one of Oregon or Texas Tech. Okay, I also agree. Last thing I'll say with JJ before I move on to some other comments and get on out of here. I will agree that not having the true OC and the O-line not really being too much better than last year's does hurt Ohio State. This team is similar to 2023, Ohio State. 2023, Ohio State, how do I put it? They didn't have the same ceiling, but I think their floor was significantly higher than this team's floor. So, Ohio State that year, with Henderson, with having technically 2 first-round picks on the O-line, with having Marvin Harrison Jr., who is a college receiver, is like as good as like Carnell Tate was this year, for example. A little bit behind Jeremiah Smith, but as good as Carnell Tate. And they had a better tight end in Stover than like receiving than Claire is. And yeah, backfield defensively wasn't as good. I think that those teams are very similar. Now, if Ohio State is as good as they were here's what I'll say. If this Ohio State team is as good as 2023 Ohio State in power ratings, they'll win it all. If they're not, they could still win it all, because I think 2023 Ohio State would probably be the best team this year. But it's tricky. Like, it's hard to compare those years, and where this Ohio State team is different from last year's Ohio State team is last year's Ohio State team was like 6-1 against the FPI top 10. This year's Ohio State's 0-1 against the FPI top 10. And their only other win against an FPI top 15 team is against Texas in week 1, where they like lost the rushing battle. So from what I can tell, this Ohio State team does not have the same juice that last year's did. They do not have the same ceiling. They probably have a similar floor, probably a lower one too, but the ceiling difference is the most noticeable. Like, last year's offense had probably double or triple the first rounders, the proven first rounders that this team does. And college Will Howard in the playoffs was playing as well, if not better than Sayin is right now. So it is very different. But Ohio State can do it. I might change my pick to them depending on what we see in the quarterfinals. I mean, they're a really good team. Yeah. Okay. Fight on Natties. I want to reply to what you say. Who do you think we go after for a new DC? I already was told by someone, but I want to see your guess. It's Pete Kwiatkowski. You're going to hire Pete Kwiatkowski. You're going to upgrade on defense next year. You were going to under Lynn as well, but you'll do it too with PK. PK probably will. PK is better than Lynn, so it will probably be an even bigger upgrade with him than you would have had with Lynn in year 3. You're going to get PK, and you're going to be a top 10 team next year and possibly a natty contender. That's what I'm thinking. Okay, everyone. Thank you for watching. Time for me to get off so I can chill a little bit before I go to bed. Love all you guys. Love the community we've built. I will see you all very soon. Bye-bye.